we are here to talk with Eliot Parker. And so let's focus on him. Um, I oftentimes, when reading the bio of our speakers, I tend to go for the very, 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 very brief bio, but I want to make sure that I hit all the notes for Eliot because there are some notable things on here. Eliot Parker's most recent and newest thriller is called A Final Call. And not only was this book an honorable mention at the London Book Festival, but it is also a 2022 finalist for the Eric Hoffer Da Vinci Eye Award, and just recently was named finalist for the 2022 Hawthorne Prize shortlist. So huge accomplishments for that one book, but also his short story collection, Snapshots, won the 2020 Pencraft Literary Award and the 2021 Feathered Quill Book Award for short story anthology. And not to be outdone, his thriller, A Knife's Edge, was an Amazon #1 bestseller, and his novel Fragile Brilliance was a finalist for the SIBA Book Prize in thriller writing in 2017. So just a little minor list of accomplishments and awards there. It's wonderful. In addition to being an author, Eliot also hosts the podcast NOW APPALACHIA, which profiles authors, editors, and publishers in the Appalachian region. And Eliot currently teaches writing at the University of Mississippi. So on that note, welcome, Eliot. Very happy to have you here. Oh, you're muted. Unmute yourself, sir.
There we go.
Fire away.
So thank you so much, Zach. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, excellent. Well, we forewent. What is the word here? We forewent. I don't know. We decided not to stick to any one particular topic for this, and instead wanted to cover some broad territory because there are quite a few things that we could talk about. The very first and foremost for me is the podcast that you run, and I get asked repeatedly, and I have questions. I think I pounded you with a few of them already of the nature of starting and running and proliferating a podcast and how you manage to have the success that you have had. So let's start with that, with Appalachia Now, and tell me a little bit about that origin, how that came to be and why you decided to do it.
Well, sure. It's a great question, and I'm happy to share the story. When I lived in West Virginia and Southern Ohio before I moved to Oxford, Mississippi, to teach at Ole Miss, I had been hosting a television program called Chapters, which is on or was on one of the local community access channels there. In West Virginia, where I lived in Western West Virginia, so I was right on the border of 3 states. So we had basically 3 different cable companies, depending on where you lived in that part of West Virginia or Eastern Kentucky or Southern Ohio. And so one of the Southern Ohio cable companies, Armstrong Cable, had a local access channel, and they did local programming on a variety of different topics. And one of them was the program called Chapters. And I just interviewed authors kind of from that region, that Eastern Kentucky, Southern Ohio, Western West Virginia region. And I did it just really for the experience and to promote the authors in that area, because what I came to find in hosting that show is that there was a great deal of really good books and award-winning books coming out of that area that oftentimes got overlooked or didn't get the coverage in mainstream media that maybe they should have. And so this gave a platform to kind of give some recognition to those authors and those books. And I did it just as a volunteer to contribute something to the community. And it also helped me a little bit talk about myself and my books a little bit as well. And what ended up happening was those were archived and put on YouTube. And Pam Stack, who runs the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, which hosts and produces and distributes the Now Appalachia podcast, had seen some of those interviews through searching on YouTube, or I'm not exactly sure how she came across it, but she reached out to me and said, I'm looking to add a few more shows to the podcast. And she said, I think you do a great job. And she said, you ask really good questions. And she said, I can tell that you prepare before your interviews. And she said, I just feel like you'd be an asset to the show. And so she gave me a list of the programs that they already had. And she said, what I'd like you to do is think about a show that we don't currently offer that kind of fits a niche in the market, in the sort of marketplace that we could talk about on the show. And so I kind of took that basic concept of chapters and expanded it out and thought, well, instead of focusing on authors from, Western West Virginia, Southern Ohio, and Eastern Kentucky, what if we broadened that a little bit and focused on Appalachian authors? And having grown up and lived in Appalachia, I was well aware, having read so many books from that region, of all the great writers and stories that were being told throughout Appalachia. And when you think about Appalachia, it runs from, southern New York all the way to northern Mississippi, where I am right now. And it encompasses parts of 13 different states up and down the East Coast. And so we're talking about a wide range of potential for authors and books to be profiled. And so I pitched that back to Pam, and she said, I think that's great. I think that's really a great idea. And I said, here's one thing, though. I've never done podcasting before. I have no idea how to do it. I said, I don't have a studio. I don't have a microphone, because when I did the chapters program, there was a video tech that brought all of that to our shoots. And so I said, I have no idea what I'm doing. And she said, oh, well, it's easy. And so she walked me through all the steps and how to do it. And I was very nervous. And I said, I've never done podcasting before. And I said, I just, and she said, well, I'll tell you what, let's do 2 or 3 episodes. And this was August of 2018. She said, let's do 2 or 3 episodes and see how it goes. See if you like it, see if you're comfortable with it, see what kind of response we get, and we'll see what happens. And so I interviewed a couple of old chapters authors that I had interviewed from several years ago when that show started. And I interviewed them because I thought, well, they'll be easy to interview. I know them well. I'm friends with them. And if this goes nowhere, they won't be mad at me, because their interview didn't get any listens, nobody listened to it. They won't be upset. Yeah. So I did 2 or 3 interviews with those folks, and it just really kind of took off from there. The feedback was really strong. People commented and responded to the network and to Pam that they really appreciated having Appalachian authors featured and profiled on a podcast show for the first time. And really, since that point, the Now Appalachia podcast has been the number 1 or number 2 ranked podcast on the entire network since August of 2018. So we have, we have listeners from 14 different countries all over the world that tune in. I've had emails and comments from people that live in London. I've had emails and comments from people that live in Morocco. You just wouldn't believe where I get feedback for people that are listening to the show, and people that are saying, I've been to America. I've been to America several times, but I had no idea about this Appalachia of which you speak of. And so that's really kind of how it all got started. I kind of fell into it not expecting it, but it's been a tremendous amount of fun. I really enjoyed it. I've had a great time getting to meet so many different authors and read so many different books that maybe I wouldn't have read on my own. And so it's been a terrific experience.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I mean, and the fact that you've been successful at that is fantastic. That one of the things that I hear so often with podcasting is that folks aren't as much nervous about what are we going to talk about, or how to structure the program, as they are the tech side of it. And you mentioned microphones and recorders and everything like that, and there's call-ins and all kinds of stuff that people have to manage, but you took a different route. And I was wondering if you could explain how you record your shows.
Sure. You can do this. One of the things I've discovered in this process, doing some research on podcasting, you can do this as inexpensively or as expensively as you want to do, depending on what you want to invest. I've met some fellow podcasters, both on the network, on the Authors on the Air network, and elsewhere, who have basically carved out recording studios in their homes, or have built a man shed or a she shed in the backyard and made that their studio. And you can certainly do that, and there's not anything wrong with that. But you can also do this very inexpensively. And since we started doing the show, Zach, in 2018. Even in the last 4 or 5 years, the technology has improved tremendously to where you don't necessarily need all of that setup anymore. When I started, there was no Zoom. Zoom was just an idea in someone's mind. MacBooks were not as ubiquitous as they are now. The power in smaller computers wasn't as big as it is now. And so, basically I record my podcasts. I have a set of headphones that I use. I do have a microphone because I feel like that helps modulate my voice. But I basically use my MacBook that I'm using right now. I have a backup computer that I use just to serve as a backup in case this one would go down or we'd have a power outage or something like that during the interview. And then I have the software in Zoom basically to actually record the interviews themselves. And then what I use I use a computer program and I just lost them. I just forgot the name of it. To just skip my mind here just a second. It'll come back to me. I want to say Napster, but that's totally not what it's called. It'll come to me here.
Depends on what decade we're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. That was in a previous life in like the early 90s. But
right.
And so anyway, I can go back through and smooth out some of the edges, or I've done interviews sometimes where a guest will cough during an answer to a question or might sneeze or something. And that happens anytime you're doing something like this. And so I can go back through Audacity. That's the name of the program. I use Audacity, which is free. And I can go back through and smooth out some of the blips or the coughs or things like that. But what's really interesting, just those pieces of technology, Zach, when you listen to the podcast, it sounds like my guest and I are in the same room. I mean, you would think we were in a radio studio somewhere sitting right across from each other. And in many cases, we're not. In many cases, we're several hours away.
It's interesting because once we had that conversation when we first talked, and I use Adobe Pro to do the video editing for these programs to go onto YouTube. And I have many times before just extracted the audio to use for things. And I was really impressed at the quality of the audio. And when you first mentioned that, I was like, duh, I mean, that seems like such a logical and easy thing to do. So it sort of bypasses all that extra technology that you need.
Absolutely. And like I said, if I have friends and other podcast friends who feel that they need more equipment and all of that, and that's perfectly fine. But there's a lot of stuff out there. There's so much stuff that's free, that's just as good as some of that expensive equipment and gives you just as good a product.
Right. We talk about getting the podcast out. Now you have a little bit of an advantage in that you have a platform kind of guiding your podcast out, but how does one go about getting their podcast on Spotify or iTunes or wherever it goes now? I don't even know. Help me.
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and that's a question too that I get emailed to me from time to time from people who've listened to the show, who maybe aren't necessarily writers or readers, but just have come across it and they want to know how it's done. Really, it used to be, that you would have to go and register accounts with Apple and Spotify and Podbean and have all of these different accounts and 17 different passwords. And, some of those sites make you change your password every so many months and all of that. Well, then another company came along called Anchor.fm, ANCHOR.fm. And anyone can upload an audio file either saved from somewhere else, or you can actually go through the Anchor.fm platform and create an audio file there. I haven't done that, so I'm not exactly sure how that works specifically, but it's meant to be very easy for the people that don't have the equipment or the people that are a little more technology challenged than others. But you can go in and upload if you have something recorded from somewhere else. And Anchor has bought some of those platform programs, Spotify, Podbean, or they have a ownership stake in those podcast platforms. And so when you post something to Anchor.fm, you can go in, you can put a title for it, you can put a description about what the podcast is about. If you're going to do this for multiple seasons, for example, you can say this was season 1, episode 1, or season 2, episode 3, or whatever you want to do. And you publish that through Anchor, and then Anchor will take that and disperse that on all of those platforms for you. So if you name your podcast, let's say Podcast with Eliot Parker or Podcast with Zach Steele, and you say it's episode 1, season 1. When you publish that through Anchor, Anchor is going to go and take the exact text that you put in the Anchor profile and disseminate all of that onto those podcast platforms, so that when somebody goes to Spotify or Podbean or SoundCloud and looks for that, they're going to find the exact same information as you put it into Anchor. And they're going to be able to listen to the podcast just as they would if they had only gone to iTunes or Spotify directly itself. So it's really taken the mystery out of having to register all these accounts and remember all of these passwords. And like I said, it uploads. I mean, it's got 10 or 11 different audio files it accepts if you want to upload to the platform. Now, I've never had Anchor do create it through Anchor itself, so I'm not sure how that works, but it's gotten so much easier. I mean, really, it's gotten to the point, Zach, where almost anybody can do a podcast now. It's not this big sort of mysterious thing, where you have to step behind the curtain and learn all the secrets.
Right.
Anchor has made it so much easier.
Oh, that's really neat. And I guess that's kind of a sort of the Hootsuite approach to, getting a podcast out. That's really cool. Well, interesting. I want to talk about podcasts forever, but we have, a limited amount of time, and there's other things that we want to talk about. Not the least of which is the wonderful response you've gotten to A Final Call. I mean, I listed off the nominations and listed as finalists and everything that you've gotten. That must feel very validating for you.
It really is. This is a book that I wrote during the COVID pandemic, when we all were stuck at home and really couldn't go
Mm.
anywhere, and there wasn't anything to do. And I'm kind of a homebody anyway, so I was home. I'm home a lot now. I'm home a lot, during COVID anyway. And so, I've been wanting to write this book for a while, but sort of all my classes at Ole Miss were switched to online, so I really had nowhere to go and couldn't go anywhere. So I'd been thinking about writing this story for a long time, and so I sat down. So that this will forever be my COVID book. That'll be the claim to fame. Somebody can look back and say, "Well, you wrote that during COVID."
Yeah.
No, but it is very affirming. It's this is a story that features a female homicide detective named Stacy Tabbitt. Takes place in Cleveland, Ohio, a place where a lot of my dad's family lived and are from. So it's an area that's familiar to me. It's a city that's familiar to me. And so it's just great fun kind of going to that place again, but in a different way.
Mhm.
And creating this female homicide detective who has got her own challenges and her own problems, but has this grain of goodness in her, and this streak of wanting to get to the bottom of crime and find the truth of what's going on, that makes her a fun character to write. So yeah, you never know, Zach. Anytime you publish a book or anything really creatively, you never know what's going to happen to it or how it's going to be received. And
Mhm.
I know this with your book. There's that moment when this book came out in I believe it was October of last year, October of 2021, or November of 2021, excuse me. And so in those first few weeks and months after it comes out, you just kind of hold your breath as the author, and you think, well, is anybody else going to think this story is any good besides me? And we always think our stories are great because we've spent weeks and months, working on them. And so, yeah, it's very validating. I mean, I think a lot of us don't write for awards necessarily, or we don't sit down to come up with a story, with the expectation that's going to win awards. But it is very affirming to have, judges and people who are authors and publishers and bookstore owners and all the people that make up these panels on these judging contests for awards to look at your book and say, yeah, this is one of the best books we've read. And these people read all the time, and they read all kinds of things. And for them to acknowledge it is just a tremendous honor. It just was
Yeah,
really, really gratifying.
that's interesting. I'm going to go back to tech for just a second, because it would appear that the Facebook gods have decided that now is a really good time during the middle of this live stream that we were doing there to update the entire structure of Facebook pages, which they said was going to do in 3 days. So for those who were watching the Facebook live stream and were suddenly cut short, hopefully you have joined us here or are watching it in video, and our apologies to that, but we'll move on. So I want to, while I'm talking tech, I'll go back to the podcast because we do have a couple of questions, and then we'll talk more about some awards and things like that. We've got one question that is, who was your favorite author to interview?
Oh my goodness, my favorite author to interview. Wow, that is a really, really great question. Um, I don't know if I have a favorite because I've interviewed so many, and some of the authors I've interviewed a couple of times. One of my favorite authors to interview was David Joy,
Mm.
who is an Appalachian writer, and he's got a fascinating story about how he became a writer, and it ties into Ron Rash, and it ties into attending Western Carolina University there in Colby, North Carolina. But
Mm.
I love David Joy because to talk to him, to watch him, he is just as average and as nice and as Appalachian as you could find. He lives on a mountain out in the middle of nowhere. If anybody knows his story,
Living the
uh,
writer's dream.
yes, he hunts and fishes, and he's just very Appalachian. And then you read his books, and his books are these beautiful, violent, brutal noir stories. And to hear him talk about writing and why he writes and how he gets the ideas for his stories, is just fascinating, because to listen to him and to talk to him, you wouldn't think he would be the kind of writer that would write that kind of stuff, and he does, and does it so well. But he is just one of the nicest people I've interviewed. He's one of the people that has been the most supportive to me individually, and he's a writer that's so supportive to other writers, especially Appalachian writers. And so he's not, maybe not my favorite. It'd be tough to pick a favorite, but he's one of my favorites, because usually in our interviews too, we have such rich discussions. We end up talking about other things not even really related to his recent book. We talk about, Appalachian culture and life and publishing and all of these other things. He's just so well versed and conversational in so many things. So he's one of my favorites.
Excellent. This next question is probably a little bit more difficult to answer, but I'm hoping you have an answer, because I'm curious too. What is the favorite question that you've asked and had answered from another author?
So this is a question that someone's asked me.
If I'm going to say that you have asked and had answered.
Oh, okay. One of the,
or just one that stands out anyway.
Yeah. I would say, one question that I like to ask a lot, because I feel like it leads to so many possibilities, and it leads to so many tentacles that branch off from the answer, that it really gives me an opportunity to kind of probe deeper into an author's life or career or their particular book that we're talking about. Is I'll ask the question, what do you hope the reader takes from your book? When they get to the last page, they close the back cover and they kind of set your book aside, either to get ready to read their next book or to go do something else or to think about your book. What is that you hope they take away from that? What is the big takeaway you hope they have? And I get so many fascinating responses to that. I've had every answer from, well, I hope you enjoyed it, to these deep philosophical questions that, or the deep philosophical answers that lead me to other questions that I want to ask, or lead to really the writer's personality and beliefs and values kind of shining through. So I've had the most interesting and diverse range of answers when I ask that question. What do you hope the reader takes away from your book when they get to the last page and close the back cover? What do you hope they walk away from? What do you hope sticks with them? And it's been amazing. And I've even had a couple authors kind of get bristly about that. Like they feel like that's a gotcha question, and it's not really a gotcha question. It's just a question to kind of, put them at the center of the story, put their book at the center of the story, and give them an opportunity to kind of leave the audience that's listening with some final thoughts. And so I've had the most interesting, wide-ranging answers from that particular question.
Yeah. No, now you got me thinking what my answer would be. But to clarify a little bit further on that question, the other part of it would have been like, what is the best advice that you have heard from other writers, from another author?
Oh gosh. Yes, the best, I would say the best advice I've heard. And this is advice that has been said several times, but in several different ways by different guests on the podcast program, is to get involved. And what I mean by get involved is find a writing community in your community, or a writing group in your community that you can get involved in. If there's not one in your community, start one. Go to conferences, go to workshops, meet other writers, network, get your sort of spiritual writing side fed through workshops and discussions, but also take opportunities to network and meet other writers. If your community is a literary community, go to readings, go to those events when authors are coming, because a lot of my authors have said, David Joy has a great story about the very first book signing he ever did. Wiley Cash, who I've interviewed, has got some great stories about his first book signings that he went to. But a lot of them will say, because if you want to be a writer, you'll be that writer having a book signing someday, and you'll want people to come to your book signing. So go to book signings and book events, even if it's someone that's not famous or not nationally known. Go and get involved. So that's the kind of the advice I get consistently from authors when we talk in terms of advice, or what advice would you give? It's something along those lines of get involved, get plugged in, pretty much be a good literary citizen is kind of what they're saying. Support your local independent bookstores. If you have one in your community, don't buy from Amazon all the time. Don't buy from Barnes & Noble all the time, although we appreciate them and they're part of the book ecosystem like everyone else. But go to your local bookstores, get to know them, let them get to know you. So just being a good literary citizen and getting involved is the advice I hear a lot of authors say, even if they phrase it differently.
Yeah. You'll get all kinds of hallelujah from me on that one. So, all right, well, let's shift gears back to contests because I am curious. With let's talk a final call specifically. The I guess nominations that you've gotten so far. Were those contests that you specifically entered, or was that done from the publishing side?
The excuse me, the publisher did most of those submissions. Um, Now they were in contact with me. Headline Books was the publisher of that book, and they were in contact with me and said, "Hey, we're submitting it here and we're submitting it there." And I also work with a publicist. I also have an independent publicist I work with, and she kind of keeps her ear to the ground on contests. And I'm grateful for that because so many of these contests come and go, and they all have different deadlines and different periods from when you submit to when you find out if you were nominated or a finalist to when you find out if you won. I would drive myself crazy trying to keep track of all of that. I feel like I've got so many spreadsheets that run my life and so many calendars that run my life already. An awards calendar might just send me over the edge.
Mhm.
But both of them have been really instrumental in submitting, and they try to submit the book to awards that it's going to be a good fit. So since a final call is a thriller, both Headline Books and my publicist, try to look for awards where that book is going to be a good fit. Now, obviously, this is kind of silly, but what I mean by that is they're not going to submit that book to a poetry contest that's
Right.
judging poetry, or a chapbook contest, or a short story anthology contest, because that book doesn't fit. But
Mhm.
there's some contests out there that are looking for more literary work. There are some contests out there looking for more genre fiction, which is kind of what mystery and thriller writing is. There are some that don't care; it can be literary or genre fiction, and so
Mhm.
they kind of keep their ear to the ground on that. And they're in contact with me and say, hey, we're going to submit this, and just wanted to let you know. And I usually say okay, and then weeks go by or months go by, and not that I forget, but I get busy doing other things, and then you get the notification that you were a finalist or that you won, and it's like, oh yeah, I forgot that got submitted to that. We talked about that in September, and it's now May, and here we are. So
Yes.
yeah, so that's been helpful on both ends to have somebody kind of keeping an eye out for me on those.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got, obviously, your bio is flush with nominations and awards that you've had from your work. Do you find that having those, even just the nominations in your bio, has helped you in terms of promotion or trying to get acceptance in communities or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because what ends up happening with most of those award contests is, even if you're a finalist or an honorable mention, there's a press release that goes out. And that press release will have your name and book title mentioned. And some of the press releases will even have a little 2 or 3 sentence summary about those. And I'll give you, and then that leads to other things. That leads to you crossing paths with other publishers. That can lead you to crossing paths with other authors who maybe was a finalist the previous year, and they somehow have gotten hold of the press release, and they reach out to you, and you either
Hmm.
develop a friendship or a collaborative relationship. I know of some folks who have secured publishing deals with different publishers through that process. That has worked for me. I found Headline Books through the SIBA Award for Fragile Brilliance from 2017. That press release had went out, and Headline Books had gotten a copy of that and read it, and they reached out to me and said, "Hey, if you ever have any more books in the future, we'd love to take a look at them." And so we developed a relationship through that. So it's really a way to kind of get your name out there, get some networking done, but it leads to so many more relationships. And I know your guests have talked about this, Zach, and on your show before, but so much of this is relationships and names and faces, and people kind of knowing who you are and what you write and that kind of thing. And so even being nominated is a great way to kind of build that cachet of relationships. And it'll happen in really weird ways. You'll get contact from somebody on a random Tuesday. Hey, I saw that you were an honorable mention in the London Book Festival. Well, I was a
Hmm.
blah 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 blah, and then next thing you know,
Yeah.
you got something. So anyway, it allows those relationships to develop new ones, and so yeah, it's very good for that.
As it relates to contests and award cycles, what would be your prime advice for writers in pursuing contests?
I would say if you want to submit to contests, I would start right now looking ahead to the 2023 to 2022, 2023 awards cycle contest. You can do it in several different ways. Writer's Digest and the Writer Magazine used to publish in their summer issues like a list of some of the contests that were coming out. I don't know if they still do that anymore. Sometimes if you do Google searches for those contests, some contests have gone away, or some contests don't update their web pages very, very frequently. But if there's some that you want to submit your work to, like let's say Forward Magazine does a great book awards contest every year. If you want to enter that, then start planning for that now. If you want to enter your book in the Reader's Favorite, which is a book review service, they do a big international book awards contest every year. They're one of the last book awards contests of the year. I think here in later this month, early June, they're going to announce their finalists and winners. Go ahead and start planning for that now. Because what you will find is all of them have different submission deadlines. Some of them, if you submit early, and they have a fee that has to accompany that, if you submit early enough, you can get a big discount on the submission fee as opposed to waiting to the last minute. But you really need to start thinking about it now and kind of get a calendar or a spreadsheet and start gridding all of that out. Because as I said a minute ago, they all have different deadlines. There's different wait periods. Forward Magazine, for example, I think their deadline for their 2023 awards is in October, but they don't announce them till March. So you've got a significant gap in time there from and I think they want the submissions at the end of September. So you're submitting them almost, 6, 7, 8 months before the awards are announced. And so it's just good to start thinking about that now. If there's certain ones you want to submit to, or you think that your work's going to be a good fit for, start now, because there's very few, and I don't want to say absolutely none, but there's very few awards that are granted in the summertime. Things are starting to wrap up here with Reader's Favorite and a few others here as we get into the end of May and June. So July and August are kind of quiet periods for awards, for book awards. And so that's a good time to start getting your ducks in a row and thinking about, okay, where do I want to submit? When's their submission deadlines? How much is the fee? Can I get a discount if I submit early enough? And all of that. Because if you try to do it kind of mid-fall, or you try to kind of do it, in late October, early November, you're going to find that you've missed some deadlines already, and you're just going to be kind of scrambling to get caught up with what's coming out in the spring, or award contests in the spring.
Excellent. And for those who are watching this via our YouTube channel, Benji Carr's running the chat, and he's thrown in some really cool links in here for places that you can go. We do actually have a copy of this chat. If you want it, just send me an email at zach@broadleafwriters.com and I can get that over to you. It's great resources. Let's jump into the Wayback Machine, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, and let's go back in time to an unpublished Eliot Parker, and whose head is full of hopes and dreams of being a published writer. Where are you, and what were you doing to pursue your dream?
Well, I have to blame my mother for all of this getting started, and I do that in a loving, joking way, because she was a big reader, and we always grew up with books in our house. We had books in every room of our house, including the bathroom, and she was always reading. I was fortunate that she read to me, my dad read to me, both sets of my grandparents read to me. And so this idea of books and reading and words and stories has been, kind of imbued in me since I was a little kid. And plus, growing up in Appalachia, we're some of the biggest storytellers that you'll ever meet. True stories and tall tales and folk tales and lies and other things. So we're pretty good at taking a traditional story and really stretching it and embellishing it quite a bit. But and so I grew up, with stories and books. And my parents, one thing that they never denied me as a kid growing up was books. I mean, anytime I went somewhere and saw a book, if I wanted it, they would get it for me. Didn't matter if I had 5 books on my nightstand at home that I hadn't read, they would get me whatever, as many books, whatever book I wanted, anytime I wanted. So I'm grateful for that. But it really wasn't until, and I had been dabbling as a writer, writing little stories and notebooks and things growing up. But when I got to 8th grade, I had an 8th grade English teacher named Mr. Cyrus, who must have noticed something in me, and he encouraged me to really write. And he would stop me in the hallway, in between class, and he would say, well, "So you writing anything new? Did you write anything over Christmas break? What are you writing, or what are you reading?" Those kinds of things. And he also would slip me little inspirational quotes about writing on these little index cards. And as I got older and moving different places and things, I've lost those index cards. I wish I'd kept them, but he had hand wrote, little sayings for me. But and I won the 8th grade writing award that year at school.
Awesome.
So, which was awesome. But that was the first time that I had someone outside of my family say that, acknowledge that maybe I had a little bit of talent. And then I was a journalism major at Marshall University in college, and I joined a creative writing club when I was a student there. And my friend Zach started the club, and he just needed warm bodies to kind of show up. I told him, so I'm not really a creative writer. I'm a journalism major. But long story short, we agreed the last year that I was in the club, my senior year, that we would work on a piece, we'd workshop a piece, and we would send it out for publication. And a literary journal at Mary Washington College called Spec published my ghost story that I had worked on.
Nice.
So that was the really first publication I ever had, on a wide scale. And of course, this is in the days before blogs and Facebook, and back when you had to submit self-addressed stamped envelopes.
SASE
journals. Yes, SASE. This is like the dinosaur ages compared. There's no submittable that stuff now like we have now. And so that was really the first time that anybody had published something kind of on a wide scale. And that was really the trigger that got me taking writing. And that was probably in 2001 or two. So 2002, I think. So that's really when I started getting more serious about it and started writing with more consistency and working to really develop, stories and to really kind of get more serious about it. And then I had several short stories published, after that. My first novel, Breakdown at Clear River, came out in 2012. And it was a product of my work. I went to Eastern Kentucky University and got my MFA in creative writing. And so part of that book got started in that program. But that was the first time I'd taken on a novel, and actually had a novel. It was published by a small press there in Appalachia. And it did really well and got all kinds of feedback and sold several thousands copies, which was just astounding to me. And so that's kind of really where it all got started. It started, way back growing up with being read to and given books. But then when I got into school and had a teacher who, took enough time to kind of mentor me and take interest in me, and that propelled me forward. So, cool. I'm grateful anytime anybody publishes anything that I write, whether it's a story or flash fiction or a novel, and because I know it's never guaranteed. And I think at the same time, if I never got anything published ever again, I think I would always write, because writing is just a part of who I am. It's just a part of me. And so I would always write, even if publication was never another option again.
Excellent. You spoke previously about the advice given of get involved, and I'm curious. This is always one of my favorite points to talk about, is that first time that you walk into the very first writing conference you've ever been. Do you remember that experience? Do you remember where you were, and what did that evoke to you?
Oh my goodness. It was a wonderful experience. The very first writing conference I went to, I was either a junior or senior in high school, because I went 2 years in a row. So I don't remember if it was junior year, senior year in high school, or senior year in high school, freshman year of college. But okay. I lived in West Virginia, and we have an organization called the West Virginia Writers Organization. And they do a big summer conference every year in June at a place called Cedar Lakes, which is north of Charleston, West Virginia, which is where I grew up. And so I'd never been to a writing conference, never went to a writing conference because I was afraid. I was nervous. I hadn't published anything really. I had the terrible imposter syndrome. I'm like, there's going to be all these really great writers here. And Denise Jardina was one of the speakers, and I'd read her book. If anybody's read Storming Heaven and some of the other great books that she's written, she was one of the speakers that year. I believe Anne Pancake was one of the speakers. Strange as This Weather Has Been is kind of her famous book. I mean, there's these great writers, that I had read in school and admired and, really loved. And I thought, well, gosh. So Mom was like, you just need to go. It was a weekend. And she said, if you don't like it, you can always come home. If you're overwhelmed, you don't like it. And what I found was the most welcoming, warm, encouraging, kind environment that I had that I could have imagined. I mean, I went in with 10 different scenarios why I would be going home later that day because I wasn't going to fit in, or I was going to be laughed at or made fun of. And what I found was just totally the opposite. I was embraced. I was called a writer. I was told I was a writer, even though I didn't have anything published of significant merit. Um, I was able to talk to Ann Pancake and Denise Jardina, just like you and I are talking now, and they treated me just like I was, their best friend. There was no pretension involved in anything. The people in the organization were wonderful. I had the best time. And that, for me, that was the first time that led me on to the discovery of this principle, which is writers are so wonderful and supportive and welcoming, and that you don't have to have a New York Times #1 bestseller to be a writer. And no one cares if you do or don't. I mean, if you do, that's great. But if you don't, no one cares. No one is going to finger wag at you or make you sit in the corner or sit over at this table and have lunch with these people if you're not of that stature. And it
Mm-hmm.
was wonderful. It was affirming. It changed my whole view. And it was really when I kind of left that conference that June, Zach, that I really kind of felt like I was a writer. That I felt like when I left Cedar Lakes and went back home, I felt like, that I was a writer. And years later, Mom told me, she said, I know you're, and my dad said this too. He said, I knew you had a good time, and I knew it was a life-changing experience because you didn't stop talking about it for 2 weeks. That's all you talked about was who you met and what you all talked about and all the books that you bought at the bookstore that was up there and all of this. And so she said, I knew it made a significant impression on you because she said, you're not one to, berate things too much. And so that's all you talked about for 2 weeks. So,
Yeah.
so it was great. I mean, it helped me totally see myself differently and writing differently and what workshops really are and what they're about. It just really put me on a much different path, I think.
Excellent. Yeah. First conferences are such a profound and memorable thing. I would share mine with you, but we don't have enough time for it. It's a good one though. But you had such a good time there and living in West Virginia. You wound up getting involved in that particular writing community and becoming a part of West Virginia writers. And I'm curious what motivated you to become involved in the organization itself.
Well, it was a situation where I've been going to the writing conference for a number of years after that. I did have to miss some years, a couple of years there because I was doing my internship, in undergrad and doing some other things going on. And so over time, you start to see kind of the same people. There's people that come year after year after year. So it kind of becomes like a family reunion when you go and you see these people. And I never really had thought of myself as getting involved in the organization. I felt like my contribution was just going, and attending and supporting that way. And supporting the authors by buying their books and getting them signed and all that kind of thing. But gradually, as time moved on, as people who, the organization was founded in 1977. And so about the time I was attending and kind of getting involved, those folks were ready to kind of move on. They had founded the organization. They were ready to kind of step down and do other things. And so we started to have openings. The people who founded the organization were done and tired of serving. And at that time, when they first started, there were no limits to board positions, to officer positions. It was just kind of an indefinite thing. And so just as time went on, opportunities, presented themselves. And I'm a firm believer, especially when it comes to writing things, never say no. Don't say no, because you always say yes, because you never know where it's going to lead or what's going to happen. Even if it makes you step outside of your comfort zone.
Well, especially if it makes you step outside your comfort zone.
Absolutely. That's when you know you're going to about to have a good experience.
Yeah. I mean, a writer's comfort zone is only about this big.
That's
so
right. It's like
how big is my computer? It's about that big.
What was it, the Huey Lewis song? It's hip to be square. So it's hip to be square for us to have that square view. Yeah. So anything can step outside of your comfort zone. And so I had an opportunity we had something called regional reps in the organization. And that is where you were assigned a county, a 3 or 4 county area near where you lived. And you were responsible for, encouraging people to come to the conference. We also gave those regional reps money to host an event like a reading or a workshop in that community. And they gave you money for promotion and to pay the presenter and that kind of thing. So I was a regional rep. That's how I got started. And so I did that for a couple of years, and another opportunity became available to be the parliamentarian for someone who whose I believe the husband had gotten transferred to Texas and had to leave for a job issue. And so there was an opening there, and I'd never been a parliamentarian, didn't know what a parliamentarian did, had no idea what Robert's Rules of Order were, none of that stuff. But I said yes, and I did it, and it was a wonderful experience because I not only learned how important the organization is to the writers in West Virginia, both novice and all up the chain of experience, but how to manage a budget, how to plan something like a conference, the work that goes into it, how to make concessions with people that have different views than you. Some people want to spend more money on this, and some want to spend less on that, and coming to a consensus. And so it was great. I just learned so many skills from that. And so I just kept working my way up, and I was parliamentarian for a couple of years, and then I was second vice president for a term. Then I was first vice president for a term, and ultimately became president. And I ended my presidency in 2017. So that was my last. So from about 2005 to probably 2017, I had some kind of position there, either as a regional rep or an officer. But it was a wonderful experience. I grew very close to the people that I was serving with. And I really got to see how important, again, the organization was to the members, but also what goes into planning events, what goes into, one of my roles, for example, as second vice president, was to monitor the regional reps and make sure if they wanted money for an event that it was given to them, and kind of follow up with them and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. So having that responsibility was a good experience. And so I learned and grew quite a bit, but I got to see a different side of conferences and planning and organization that I hadn't a lot of experience with before.
That's excellent. I'm curious, you teach writing at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. And I'm curious about that experience and what that's like working with college students in teaching the craft.
Well, it's a great question. It's really all across the board. Generally speaking, my students are wonderful. They're kind, they're curious. They're interested and interesting, and they are very much interested in wanting to be writers and getting better. And so they're very receptive to things that you suggest, to texts that you have them read, to suggestions that you make to make their writing better. But you also have some students who are reticent. They think they maybe want to be a writer, but they're not sure. Are they really pursuing the right path? Or, someone told them in their life that they had some writing talent, but they were not really sure. And so they're in your creative writing class to figure out if they've got that talent. Or if it was just someone being kind to them in a moment of life. And so, and then you have some folks who, were like, yeah, I knew I wanted to be a writer from fifth grade. I knew from that point forward. And then you have some students who have some publishing success. I have students that come into the classroom that have had some stories in literary journals published, or they've had a chapbook win a contest somewhere. So it's just a wide range of abilities and talents and confidence levels. But what I found is, everybody grows and progresses by the end of the semester, and how the students form groups and kind of communities, small communities in the larger classroom, and how some of those students who maybe have had a little bit more publishing success than others kind of take the younger students kind of under their wing and mentor them outside of the classroom, where they get together and have sort of critique groups. They form these critique groups where they're swapping work, things that they're working on. And this is all done kind of outside of class. And so it's really great to see them grow and progress, and really see them, for the ones that have a little bit less confidence than maybe some others, to see them really by the end of the semester feel like, I can do this. I am doing the right thing. I am pursuing my passion and my interest, and I feel like I'm a step closer to where I want to be. So that's always a very rewarding feeling as well. So it's great. I enjoy them very much, and I learn a lot of myself about the way I see things and read texts and interpret things just by listening and working with them. So I get as much out of it as they do, I think.
Excellent. Well, we've got a few minutes left. If there are any other questions out there, just fire away. But I have one more for you, and I'm just going to turn around the question from before on you. What do you want readers to gain from your books? And I know it's a more generalized thing because we're talking about you as a writer rather than just one particular book. But when they get done reading a book, what do you want a reader to gain from it?
Oh my goodness, that is a great question. That is a great question. I hope that, you know, when you get to the last page and you close the book, I hope that you certainly were entertained. I hope that you were in a situation where maybe you had dishes or laundry to do and you didn't get those done because you were so immersed in my story you couldn't put it down, or your husband or wife got mad at you because you stayed up till 3:30 or 4 with the flashlight on the book trying to finish it while they were trying to get some sleep. Uh, so I hope it kept you turning the pages. But I also hope that I gave you a story with characters that you could identify with, characters that you could sympathize with, characters who you didn't maybe always understand their motivations, particularly the villains, but you at the same time understood kind of why they took the position that they did, or why they said what they did or did what they did, and that you feel like that the time and money that you spent on the book was well worth it. And I put this in a lot of my acknowledgments pages. I mean, time and money are two of the most precious things in our society, and I think, you know, coming out of the COVID pandemic, I think we learned that lesson tremendously over the last couple of years. That time, maybe not so much about money, but that time is so important. And I hope that ultimately you'll say, you know what, that book cost me whatever it cost me, and it took me however much time it took me to read it, but it was worth it. And I felt like that was an investment, because I put that in my, you know, I don't take that for granted. I don't take that time and money that readers spend for granted. And I'm so appreciative of people that take it, if it's that invest that time in something I've written, even if they're someone who's read my stuff before, if they're someone who's never read any of my stuff. Just making that monetary and time commitment is something I don't take for granted. So I hope readers feel like it was worth it when they get to that last page.
Excellent. Well, on the last page and on the last word, thank you, Eliot. It's been fun chatting, and obviously I think we could do this for hours. I'm grateful for you, for your time, and for your energy into this program.
Thanks, Zach. I appreciate it. I appreciate the program, and thanks for all the work that you guys do for all the work that you do on the program, and all the work that Broadleaf does for writers and readers. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Eliot.